Britain keeps producing prehistoric discoveries that do not fit the simple Stonehenge story most people were taught. A monument built and rebuilt across more than 1,000 years. Stones dragged from mountains nearly 200 miles away. A buried ring of enormous shafts that no one knew was there until machines began to read the ground. And a single slab at the center of it all that may have traveled from the far north of Scotland, a place no one expected. The pattern is the same every time. Researchers arrive expecting one thing. The landscape shows them something else. For most of the last century, Stonehenge was treated as a puzzle that could be solved. A ring of stones on Salisbury Plain. Strange, but contained. Something you could walk around in an afternoon and feel you had seen. That version is becoming harder to maintain because in the last 15 years, the ground around Stonehenge has been surveyed in a way no previous generation could attempt. Not with shovels first, but with sensors. Magnetometer arrays towed across the fields. Ground-penetrating radar reading the soil layer by layer. Computers stitching millions of measurements into a single buried map. And the map did not show an isolated monument. It showed a landscape. Start with the stones themselves, because even they refuse to behave. Stonehenge sits on Salisbury Plain in Wiltshire, in the south of England. Open chalk grassland, wind exposed, the horizon low in every direction. The monument we picture today, the Great Trilithons, the lintels balanced across upright stones, was not the first thing built here. What is established is this. The site began around 3000 BCE as a circular earthwork enclosure, a bank and ditch with a ring of pits inside it. The towering sarsen stones came centuries later, around 2500 BCE. So the famous silhouette is not a single act of construction. It is the surviving stage of a project that people returned to, altered, and rebuilt across more than 1,000 years. That alone complicates the story. But the stones raise a harder question. Where did they come from? The largest stones, the sarsens, are a hard sandstone. For decades, it was assumed they came from the Marlborough Downs to the north, but the exact source was uncertain. In 2020, a team led by David Nash at the University of Brighton matched the geochemical fingerprint of most of the sarsens to a specific area called West Woods, near Marlborough, roughly 25 kilometers away. Moving stones weighing over 20 tons that distance across that terrain with the technology of the period is its own quiet astonishment. But the sarsens are not the strange ones. The strange ones are the smaller stones, the bluestones. The bluestones are darker, smaller, and geologically out of place. They do not belong to Salisbury Plain at all. Decades of analysis traced them to the Preseli Hills in West Wales, and excavations led by Mike Parker Pearson and colleagues identified actual quarry sites there at outcrops called Craig Rosie Felon and Carn Godog, with evidence of stone extraction. The distance is close to 200 miles. Sit with that. Some of the stones at the center of Stonehenge were selected, cut, and moved across most of southern Britain by people without the wheel in common use, without metal tools, without written records. And they did it deliberately. They chose these stones over the perfectly usable rock that lay all around them on the plain. The accepted version becomes harder to maintain the longer you look at it. This was not convenience. This was intent. Stone carried that far is stone that meant something. What remains uncertain is why those particular hills, why those outcrops, what the stones represented to the people who hauled them. The question is still open. For a long time, the investigation stopped at the stones. Then the technology changed, and the focus shifted to everything around them. Between roughly 2010 and 2014, the Stonehenge Hidden Landscapes Project, a collaboration involving the University of Birmingham and the Ludwig Boltzmann Institute in Austria, led by Vince Gaffney, surveyed several square kilometers of the surrounding land. No digging at first, just instruments dragged back and forth across the fields, recording tiny variations in the magnetism and density of the soil. The data was processed into a three-dimensional picture of what lay buried, invisible from the surface. This is the part the title promises: machines reading the ground. And what the processed data revealed was not empty grassland with one monument in the middle. It was crowded, buried pits, filled ditches, traces of structures no one had recorded, previously unknown features scattered across the landscape, hidden under a thin skin of soil. The survey turned a famous monument into the visible fragment of something far larger. Researchers arrived expecting to map the setting of Stonehenge. The instruments showed them that Stonehenge was never alone. 2 miles to the northeast sits a site that should be as famous as Stonehenge, and is not. Durrington Walls. It is one of the largest henge enclosures in Britain, a vast circular earthwork over 400 meters across. Excavations there, including work led by Parker Pearson, uncovered the remains of a substantial Neolithic settlement. Houses, hearths, and enormous quantities of animal bone, dating to roughly the same period as the Great Sarsen phase of Stonehenge. The bones told an unexpected story. Isotope analysis of pigs and cattle found at Durrington Walls indicated that some of the animals had been raised far away in different regions of Britain and brought to this one place. People were traveling long distances to gather here, to feast, possibly seasonally. So a picture begins to form: Stonehenge of stone, Durrington Walls of timber and the living. A landscape divided, perhaps, between the dead and the feast, connected by the river that runs between them, the Avon. It is a compelling reading. It is also, in places, still debated. What is established is the scale of the gathering. What remains uncertain is exactly what it meant. Then, in 2020, the ground gave up something that genuinely should not have been there. A team working across several British universities, building on the geophysical surveys and following them with coring and analysis, identified a ring of massive shafts surrounding Durrington Walls. Not small pits. Shafts more than 10 meters wide and over 5 meters deep, arranged in a vast circle roughly 2 kilometers in diameter, with Durrington Walls near its center. If the interpretation holds, it is one of the largest prehistoric structures ever found in Britain. A circle so big you could not see its full shape from the ground. A boundary or an enclosure on a scale that the people who made it could only have grasped as an idea, never as a single view. This is the discovery that does not solve the mystery. It widens it, because the obvious questions have no settled answers. Why dig shafts on that scale? What did the ring enclose, or exclude, or mark? The features have been examined, and the interpretation has been discussed and questioned. Whether every shaft is fully artificial, how they relate to one another. And that debate is part of the honest record. But the central fact is hard to wave away. Something enormous was laid out across this landscape, and it was deliberate, and we did not know it existed until the instruments found it. By this point, the pattern is clear. Stonehenge was not standing alone. It was one visible piece of a landscape that had been used, altered, and remembered for thousands of years. And the landscape keeps offering more. There is the avenue, a pair of parallel banks and ditches running from Stonehenge down toward the River Avon, treated by many researchers as a processional route, a way the monument was approached. There is the cursus, an immense, narrow earthwork enclosure stretching for nearly 3 kilometers across the plain, older than the stone monument itself, and still not fully explained. There is Woodhenge, the remains of concentric rings of timber posts near Durrington. There are the burial mounds, the round barrows that cluster across the ridgelines, placed where they would be seen against the sky, holding the dead of later generations who chose to be buried in sight of the stones. And there is what came before all of it. At Blick Mead, close to Stonehenge, excavation has revealed evidence of human activity reaching back into the Mesolithic. thousands of years before the first bank and ditch was cut. People were drawn to this stretch of land long, long before the monument we know was even imagined. Layer on layer, use on use, memory on memory. The landscape was not built once. It was returned to, again and again, by people separated from each other by more time than separates us from the Romans. So what was it for? The honest answer is that no single explanation has won, and the strongest researchers tend to hold several at once. It may have been a great ceremonial gathering place, somewhere people traveled to from across Britain, as the animal bones at Durrington suggest, to mark moments in the year together. It may have been a monument to the ancestors and the dead. Cremated human remains were buried at Stonehenge in its earliest phases, and the surrounding barrows make death a constant presence in the landscape. Some read the whole complex as a place built around remembering the dead in enduring stone. It is, beyond serious dispute, aligned to the sky. The main axis of Stonehenge frames the rising sun at midsummer and the setting sun at midwinter. Whether that alignment was the purpose of the monument, or one meaning among many, is where the debate sharpens. And it may have been a unifying project in a social sense, a vast cooperative undertaking that bound distant communities together through shared labor, shared stone, and shared ceremony. These explanations do not cancel each other. A place used for over 1,000 years could have meant different things to different generations. What is established is that it mattered. What remains uncertain is the single word that would explain why. That word has not been found, which brings the story back to where it started, to the stones that refuse to behave. In 2024, a study published in the journal Nature re-examined one specific stone at the heart of the monument, the altar stone, a large slab lying flat near the center. It had long been grouped loosely with the Welsh bluestones. The new geochemical analysis, by a team including researchers at Curtin University, did not match it to Wales at all. The mineral fingerprint pointed north, far north, to the Orcadian Basin of northeast Scotland, a source potentially 600 miles from Salisbury Plain. If that finding holds, it means a single stone at the center of Stonehenge may have been carried the length of Britain, not across a region, across the entire island. This is the discovery that should not exist. A slab from the top of the country resting at the heart of a monument in the south, set there by people we assume could barely cross a river with a heavy load. It forces a question the simple Stonehenge story was never built to answer. How connected was Neolithic Britain? How far did these people move? How much did distant communities know of one another, share with one another, depend on one another? The finding does not close the story. It makes the story larger. Researchers are still trying to explain it. The route is unknown. The method is unknown. The reason is unknown. What is established is the stone's chemistry. What remains uncertain is everything that chemistry implies. The question is still open. Britain's prehistoric record is not a fixed story. It is a landscape still being read. Every new survey, every core sample, every fingerprint pulled from a single slab seems to do the same thing. It does not shrink the mystery into something manageable. It expands it. The monument we thought we understood turns out to be one stone circle inside a buried world of shafts, avenues, enclosures, and routes that stretch across the whole of an island. Stonehenge may be the most famous part of it, but it was never the whole thing. And the more carefully the ground is read, the more it insists that we still do not know what these people were doing here, or how far they were willing to go to do it. If one of these discoveries changed how you see ancient Britain, leave it in the comments. Subscribe for more ancient sites that keep rewriting what researchers thought they knew.